Adjectives. My name is David Peterson, and this is the Art of Language Invention. Episode 28, Creating Noun Declensions. I got two slightly different questions from Giacomo Marazzo and Jacob Scott that were both basically about the same thing. They were asking about how you create different noun declensions. As an example, High Valyrian has, six different noun declensions, meaning that there are 6 different basic patterns that all of the nouns fall into. There are other patterns within the patterns, but basically, if you're asking yourself what is a noun declension, think about nouns and what exactly they express. So a noun can display or mark or have affixes about or whatever, or have different forms for number, case, gender, and then a grab bag. I don't know, some other thing that some language might decide to do. But anyway, the idea, let's say that you just had number, case, and gender. By the theory, if you want to know what shape a noun is going to be, you need to know what number it's going to be in, what case it's going to be in, what gender it is, and then, of course, what word it is. And you should come up with one singular form. That's going to be true of all languages. But if you take out, say, the semantics of it and say, all right, well, what about if it's the same case, number, or gender? Are we still going to get the same type of form? So the same endings if they're suffixes, the same prefixes if they're prefixes, blah, blah, blah. In theory, it should always have the same ending. That's how it should work in theory. In practice, though, it does not always work that way. So, for example, let's take Latin, and let's take nouns that are masculine, in the accusative, and in the plural. Again, theoretically, these should always have the same endings, but of course, they don't. Here, for example, are 4 nouns that match that description. All of these nouns are masculine, they're all plural, and they're all in the accusative. You have poetas, excuse my pronunciation, I never took Latin, I don't know how it's pronounced, dominos, duces, portus. So, 4 different nouns, 4 different endings. Of course, all of these things have something in common. So in other words, they all end in S, and they all actually have a long vowel in there. So there's something that's recognizable. But why do you have these 4 different vowels? Why do you have basically different endings like this if it has nothing to do with case, number, or gender? Well, this is actually what declensions are. This is what noun declensions are. There are different classes, different categories of nouns in Latin that fall into these different subpatterns, and each of these subpatterns have things that are in common that have nothing to do with gender, number, or case. Instead, they just have to do with phonology and morphology. In addition to phonological cohesion, a lot of declensions display similarities when it comes to syncretism. So, for example, looking at our 4 words from Latin, let's look at the genitive, dative, and ablative singular forms for each of those nouns. Starting with poeta, you have poetae for the genitive, which also works for the dative. And then there's a separate form for the ablative, poeta, with a long a at the end. For dominus, you have something different. You have a unique genitive form, but then the same dative and ablative form. So with the first declension, you have one type of chunking, and then with this next declension, I think that's declension 3, you have another type of chunking. No, that's declension 2. Whatever, I don't know. I don't speak Latin. It doesn't matter. All right. Trust me, you can check it on Wikipedia. It's correct. All right. Next, duces. Now we have 3 separate forms. So a distinct genitive, dative, and ablative singular, and they look like that. And then finally, for the last one, you have another one. This is, remember, portus. 3 separate forms that are distinct, but now the genitive singular form looks exactly like the accusative plural. And that's just for this particular declension. So, in addition to this phonological similarity, you can partly define a declension by basically which ones use the same forms for the same cases. And it'll be the same across the entire declension regardless of the gender of the noun. So that's basically why declensions exist and why they're important and why you need to know about them if you're learning a language. So now the question is, how do you create things like this? One thing that might help you figure this out, because it's not super difficult, is by looking at the names that are given to these Latin declensions. They basically are the A declension, the E declension, the O declension, the U declension, the E declension, and the declension that ends in consonants. I mean, that's a pretty big clue there. Basically, if you remember that case forms, case suffixes, and all these things, they come from lexical material ultimately, or from random other little bits there, and phonology. If you try to basically combine forms here, you have word A and word B, and you try to combine it, the result is probably going to be different depending on the form of the word that the one is being attached to. So in other words, take the same word and attach it to 5 different words with 5 unique phonological forms, you might get 5 different results. You might not. You might get 4, you might get 3, you might get 1. It depends on the language and exactly how it does it, and of course the phonology of all of those things. But I mean, more often than not, you'll end up with 2 to 3 different forms. And maybe some of these will get leveled out over time due to analogy, but this is what gives you your declension classes. To give you a concrete example, let's look at High Valyrian. I'll show you 2 different types of things that I did here, one phonological and one morphological. First, we'll look at the phonological. I'm going to show you 3 different nouns. All of these nouns are lunar nouns, so they all belong to the same gender. They basically, though, they come from 3 different declensions. One the A declension, one the U declension, and then one the E declension. So here they are. The nouns are vala, which is the word for man, tresi, which is the word for sun, and gelte, which is the word for helmet. If you look at the forms, here are all the forms. You have vala, and these are singular plural nominative, then singular plural accusative. Vala, vali, vale, vali. Then tresi, 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 tresi. Gelte, gelti, gelti, gelti. So, if you look at this, the first thing that should jump out to you if you're just looking at this is that, well, there's probably something E going on in the plural, and maybe in the accusative. And this is basically, I mean, this has been lost to history at this point, but yeah, you have something that's doing that was doing pluralization and something that was doing accusativization in kind of a way. And both of them had front vowels associated with them, or front high vowels. It was just the case that the one for plural happens to be stronger than the one for the accusative. So looking back at the forms, with vala, again, the strong plural, let's look at the plurals first. The strong plural basically knocks out the vowel for all 3 of these forms. So they all have exactly the same plural nominative form and plural accusative form, but we'll get to that one later. Look at the plural nominative. So they all have a short E because they basically just kicked out the old vowel. For the accusative singular, there's a bit of a weaker thing there, and it's more of a combination. So you have this A plus a short E becomes an A. The E plus an E becomes kind of an A, which then gets realized later on as a long E. With tresi, the U vowel cannot coexist with the E vowel. That's just a little phonological rule of High Valyrian. So when it comes next to the E vowel just in fact knocks it off, and it's dead. So that's why the accusative singular of tresi is tresi and not tresi with a long E. Now for the plurals of all of these, you're basically working with this accusative base form, this accusative singular form, and they all have these powerful E ones on the end there. But basically there's already something on there, so it can't really knock it off. So the whole thing just results in a long E vowel, and then that's how that happened. But again, it's the phonology of the original form. Even if you don't want to call it part of the root, it's the phonology of the original stem that's on the end there that affects what type of vowel you get in the accusative singular. Next, we're going to look at the instrumental and comitative case forms. The instrumental case, which I may have talked about somewhere before, is just a case that you add to a noun and it means you perform the action of the verb using that noun, kind of like you eat soup with a spoon. And then the other one, the comitative, that's when you complete the action of the verb with some sort of companion. So in other words, you walk to the store with a friend. Many languages conflate these two, like English, for example. We use with for both. In High Valyrian, there's a separate one for each one. Some languages have separate ones, some do not. High Valyrian does. But if you look at the instrumental and comitative case forms for the various nouns, you'll notice that some split and some lump. There's basically an S kind of thing going on with the instrumental and an M kind of thing going on with the comitative generally. But here are the forms for the three nouns that we are looking at. So vala has valosa for the instrumental singular. These are all singular. And valoma for the comitative singular. Tresi has tresomi for the instrumental and the comitative singular. So they're the same. Gelte, on the other hand, has geltose and geltome for the instrumental and then the comitative. The first thing that you'll probably notice is the phonology of them. So the phonology is the same. It's O plus either this S or M, and then the theme vowel. So that kind of gives you an idea about how this thing came to be. The O, incidentally, comes from the genitive. That's basically how these cases were constructed. But as for whether you get S and M or just M, and there are also forms that I'm not showing here that have just S, it basically goes back to what types of nouns these things kind of fell into, whether people use the S or the M form more than the other, or equally. So this is, again, something that holds for the declension class. So all first declension nouns have a distinct S and M form, the same with the E declension, which is, I want to say fourth, I don't remember. The Y declension, the second declension, though, only has the M form. And the reason for that is that the U declensions were basically mostly humans. This entire declension class, there's both solar and lunar. They're almost exclusively human-referring nouns and a lot of names, especially if you go to the solar, where you have the us ending, the ys ending, ton of names there. So basically, people just use the M forms and then they kind of generalize to the rest of the paradigm, even for words that are not referring to humans. On the other hand, for A and A, there's kind of an even mix, and so you just get both forms equally. On the other hand, if you go to something like the third declension, which we didn't show here, all of the O forms, it's vanishingly rare to get a human in there, and so you actually just get S forms for both, even in the comitative, when you happen to be specifically using the comitative. So that was basically how I informed whether these things were going to lump or split in the singular. In the singular or the plural. They lump and split both in the singular and in the plural. And then, of course, when it came to the adjectives just match. You can have both forms for any adjective. It just matters if the noun has an M form, then you use an M form in the adjective. If it has an S form, you use an S form in the adjective. So that's basically the idea behind noun declensions. It depends on the phonology of the noun that you're actually working with and how that's going to interact with the cases or numbers or whatever that you're building. It helps, or it's easier to build noun declensions if you start with a proto-language and then build up, as opposed to trying to do it just the scattershot or a random method. You can certainly do it that way, and I guess just roll dice, figuring out which ones are going to be syncretic and which ones aren't. But it's probably not going to be as satisfying for the user or for you, and it's going to be hard to get it looking exactly realistic. I mean, these things only exist because that's how it was done throughout the ages, and that's how these darn things evolved. That's the whole point of doing it this way. Anyway, I also like doing it via the historical method just because I don't have to come up with this stuff. I can just know why it happened and just follow what's been set out before me. It's a lot easier for me to do that, I think, than try to come up with random stuff on the fly for no reason. So anyway, hopefully that answers both Giacomo's and Jacob's questions about noun declensions. If it doesn't, just feel free to comment and we'll try to address them when we can. And of course, if there's enough, then I'll just make another video. That's it for this episode. If you have a question you'd like for me to answer on the show, leave it in the comments or send me an email at djpquery@gmail.com. If you want to see more videos like this one, feel free to subscribe. Thanks for watching.